I think for far too long in this country, millions of people felt as though they weren't represented at all by the establishment media.
GB News was needed because there literally was no other voice. Everyone was saying the same thing.
GB News exists because there is a desperate need for fearless journalism that puts the people first.
GB News came on the scene as a disruptor, and it has always been a disruptor ever since.
The mainstream is all about keeping the status quo as it is, ticking along quite nicely. They don't want to ask difficult questions.
But journalism is journalism at the end of the day, and we're not here to serve any masters. Our masters are our audience.
Charlie Peters, he gave a voice to the victims of grooming gangs, and now, of course, it's led to a national inquiry.
GB News exists to make sure those concerns are put forward and people feel as though what they want to ask is put to those in power.
We don't take orders from anyone. We ask the questions our viewers and listeners want answering.
I know what's actually being discussed by my family and my friends. Us ordinary, hard-working British people have had enough. We've had enough.
They're fed up with the same old establishment nonsense. Everything that we do is opening up conversations that others are afraid to go at.
Why are you illegally bringing people into Britain?
That is our job. Our job is to get to the truth.
If it's important to you watching or listening at home, then it's important to us as well.
That's what makes us the fearless champion of Britain.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight.
We must leave the ECHR and repeal the Human Rights Act.
Kemi Badenoch has announced that a Conservative government would take Britain out of the European Convention on Human Rights. But is it time to go further? Should we now exit all the international bureaucratic bodies and reclaim full control over our nation's laws and borders? Plus...
To business. Today, I say loud and clear, Labour may have given up on you, but this Conservative Party never ever will. We will always be there for business.
The economy has dominated the agenda of the Conservative Party conference today, with plans for backing businesses and cutting tax and red tape. Could sound economics prove to be the Tories' redemption? Also tonight, the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor is facing questions after a major Chinese spying trial collapsed. And what message it sends to our adversaries? Is China Britain's most dangerous enemy? Plus, is the government's new plan to crack down on repeat protests a public safety measure or an attack on freedom of association? And, oh, you'll love this, cyclists in London are setting records. Pedestrian injuries are rising, half of cyclists admit to running red lights, and fines for riders outnumber drivers 10-1. 3 times cyclists were held accountable for their conduct on the road. State of the Nation starts now. To be joined by my most intellectual panel of former Conservative MP and Minister Sir John Redwood and the former Labour MP Stephen Pound. As always, I want to know your views. Mailmog at gbnews.com. But now it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Bethany Elsey.
Good evening, I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Donald Trump says peace talks between Israel and Hamas in Egypt have so far been very successful, urging negotiators to move fast to avoid bloodshed. Hamas has agreed to parts of a 20-point US peace plan, including freeing hostages, but rejected calls to disarm. Trump says the first phase of the deal could be completed this week. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes have continued, with at least 65 more people killed in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, activist Greta Thunberg has arrived in Greece after being deported from Israel, along with 170 others detained on board an international flotilla. The group's vessels were intercepted in the Mediterranean as they tried to deliver aid to Gaza. The Foreign Office says it's supporting a number of British nationals involved. It comes as another 9 ships have set sail for Gaza, aiming to breach Israel's blockade. The Conservatives are promising a £5,000 boost for first-time buyers, calling it a first-job bonus to help young people onto the property ladder. The Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride unveiled the plan at the party's conference in Manchester, saying it'll be funded by £47 billion in cuts. Welfare, the civil service and foreign aid are all in the firing line as the Tories try to prove they're tougher on spending than Labour. First-year doctors in England have voted overwhelmingly in favour of strike action over job insecurity. The British Medical Association says 97% back the move on a 65% turnout, calling it a clear mandate for industrial action. Talks with the government are ongoing, but the union warns they must deliver solutions on both pay and jobs to avoid walkouts. France has been plunged into fresh political turmoil after Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu quit within a month of taking to office. He was the country's 5th Prime Minister in under 2 years and blamed gridlock in Parliament for his departure. It leaves President Emmanuel Macron facing mounting pressure to call early elections or risk another short-lived government. Stocks in Paris have fallen sharply since the announcement. The US Supreme Court has rejected Ghislaine Maxwell's appeal to overturn her conviction for helping Jeffrey Epstein sexually abuse teenage girls. The British socialite was sentenced to 20 years in prison after being convicted on sex trafficking charges, but her lawyers argue she should never have faced prosecution because of a deal Epstein made to protect his co-conspirators. And tributes are being shared across the literary world for the much-loved author Dame Jilly Cooper, who's died at the age of 88. Her children say her death came after a fall on Sunday morning, describing it as a complete shock. Her agent, Felicity Blunt, called her unbeatable in her ability to write stories that added to the sum of human happiness. You're up to date. I'll have more for you in an hour's time.
Take the GB News family with you on any device. As long as you have an internet connection, tune into GB News anywhere on the planet or beyond.
Welcome back to Save the Nation. Kemi Badenoch has announced at the Conservative Party conference that if the Tories win the next election, Britain will leave the European Convention on Human Rights.
We must leave the ECHR and repeal the Human Rights Act. But this is the only way to end spurious legal claims from immigrants with dubious stories and excuses. This is the only way to allow a British government, the next Conservative government, to deliver a British borders plan in full.
The policy aims to protect our borders, stop the boats and ensure we are a self-governing nation. The announcement comes following a review into the use of legal challenges preventing the government from making and implementing its decisions, which revealed many examples of the ECHR blocking laws made by Parliament and the courts. This is the right policy, one that regains Britain's legal and constitutional sovereignty while simplifying lawmaking, so that the laws we live are made by us. These are the same principles behind Britain's decision to leave the European Union, which was taken nearly a decade ago. Leaving the ECHR is the next logical step. The Shadow Attorney General and Barrister Lord Wolfson KC said ECHR membership places significant practical limits on the UK's ability to maintain control of its borders. Lord Wolfson's review concluded that the ECHR places significant obstacles in the way of decision-making and that other options, such as negotiating changes or repealing the Human Rights Act, would be ineffective while remaining in the ECHR. The brilliant Lord Wolfson is right, and his analysis exposes these problems with great clarity. It is, or it would be, the restoration of the historic constitutional idea that the King in Parliament is sovereign. But in my view, the Conservatives need to go further. The ECHR is not the only international non-governmental body preventing us from self-governance. The International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, and the World Health Organization, to name but 3, are either corrupt or anti-British or both, and exert power over our country without accountability or sometimes they're even actively hostile to this country. They're run by a group of dodgy people who often don't act in our interests. So leaving the ECHR is in practice the next phase of Brexit. In order to utilise the freedom and sovereignty available to us, we need to adopt this policy as soon as possible and go further to abandon the unaccountable bureaucratic blocks, reinstate parliamentary sovereignty, your democracy, and make sure the laws we follow are the laws made by the British people. As always, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm now joined by my most intellectual panel, the former Conservative MP Sir John Redwood and the former Labour MP Stephen Pound. Stephen, Kemi's done really well, hasn't she? She's announced clear policies, and this is Britain back in the driving seat.
John, sorry, Jacob, what she's done here is raced after Nigel Farage to say, wait for me, I'm up there with... Look, do we really want to be the only country in Europe, apart from Belarus and Russia, who have resiled themselves from this European convention?
With the USA
the real point here is,
and New Zealand and Australia.
To leave the ECHR is not a sticking plaster for the utter failure of the previous Conservative government to control the borders. The idea that they can somehow cease any of these appeals when we all know that the problem is it's the immigration tribunal, the second and third stage tribunals, who come up with these ridiculous things. It is British law and British lawyers who are causing the problem here.
So we repeal the Human Rights Act as well. But your argument is entirely negative. It's we mustn't leave because we'd be like Belarus. Can you give a positive argument for why we allow foreign judges in Strasbourg to make our laws?
Well, so one of them is ours. One of those is our judge. We have the right
one out of 25, whatever it is.
But listen, do we really want to actually be on the side of those people who are resiling from basic human decency?
Stephen, I very rarely interrupt you, but I want one positive argument for remaining in, rather than just the negative argument.
To take our place in the company of civilised nations.
All right. John, are you convinced?
No, I think you made an excellent case, and I don't know why people like Stephen have to run our democracy down all the time. Our democracy is perfectly capable of making good moral judgments and reflecting those in the law that we impose. And it is not right that then foreign judges in faraway courts can overturn things which Parliament intended. You and I know that successive Conservative Home Secretaries were very determined to stop the small boats. It wasn't that they lacked the will or the enthusiasm to do it, but they were constantly undermined by lawyers here using international courts and international jurisdiction to stop the will of the British people. Labour now admits it's the will of the British people to stop the boats. Why didn't we stop them? You've got the answer. It's these foreign courts.
These foreign courts. And it's not just the ECHR, it's also the Convention on Refugees. But the other courts are a problem. The ICJ ruling against us on Chagos, which was not justiciable in front of it. The International Criminal Court going after our allies who aren't even signatories to it. Actually, this international order doesn't work, and it's fundamentally anti-democratic.
I'm sorry, the Chagos regulator, the Chagos decision was actually not binding. Don't forget, it was advisory. And if you honestly, I mean, I have huge respect for you, sir, but the idea that the World Health Organization is some devious body run by what you, in your own expression,
corrupt.
Dodgy people. The World Health Organization...
Oh, yeah, it's very corrupt.
I'm sorry, the World Health Organization exists to actually protect the health of the world.
If only that were true. It covered up for China over Wuhan, and we now know that.
Well, it didn't.
It did.
OK, so I think the Chinese covered up with Wuhan.
And they're big funders of the WHO.
But anyway, why aren't our doctors capable of making these decisions under proper democratic scrutiny?
Global pandemics,
my objection to the WHO is that during COVID, when I thought they were making bad calls as well as good calls, I, as a member of Parliament, couldn't hold them to account. All I could do was hold ministers to account, and they would say, oh, well, it's the international agreement.
What we could do is simply not accept their suggestion. Now, Boris Johnson has said today that he felt that he was vastly over-enthusiastic about that, and he went too far. We didn't have to implement what the WHO said. We didn't have to do it.
We did. So it's a nuisance.
Whose fault is that?
OK, but
it's not the WHO's fault, it's the British government's fault.
It is when it made mistakes. It's better to pull out of it and be clear, which is what Kemi is proposing with the European Convention on Human Rights. It's a bold step for her. And your point that she's just catching up with Nigel, well, actually, Wolfson's report is a really serious piece of work. I'm a great fan of his. I think he's quite a brilliant man. But that he works through the difficulties as well as the positives and says this is a political choice. You will have to deal with this. it's not impossible to deal with. And I think that's proper, serious work and shows Kemi and the Tories in a good light.
It is, and I think they have to say that the detail of the Wolfson report compared to the sort of the bombast we've heard from the Conservatives up in Manchester today is very, very different. For example, on the issue of the Belfast Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, which a lot of people have been saying that if we leave the ECHR, that collapses the Good Friday Agreement. In fact, it doesn't. It can be amended. Wolfson talks to you about amending, not just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The ECHR has a lot of good within it, but it should be amended. It should be trimmed. But above all, British lawyers should actually enforce in the interest of the British people, not in their own prejudices and their own fantasies.
I think Stephen's coming around to our way of thinking, but it is an impressive report in that regard, isn't it? That it sets out that there may be difficulties with the EU in carrying out the European cooperation in criminal justice, but that's a problem you then have to deal with. And that's, I think, a good way to make policy. I think I was critical of Kemi for not making policy earlier, but actually if you then come out with good policy, that's a pretty good justification.
Yeah, I wasn't critical because I felt it was going to take time. And I remember how long it took myself as a young man helping Margaret Thatcher in the 70s to recover from a disastrous episode of bad government and then a far worse Labour government. And so I think she was absolutely right. And you're right, that this is a serious piece of work. I mean, Nigel is brilliant at the campaigns and the headlines, but we've got to prepare for government. And we've seen previous ministers who want to stop the boats every bit as much as Nigel does fail because they hadn't got that legal backup and they hadn't got that technical resolve behind them. So I think this is a very valuable contribution to the debate, and I hope the government will look at it seriously as well, because the government now says it wants to stop these small boats, or smash the gangs as it calls it. Why doesn't it read this report and borrow it?
Well, I bet it doesn't. But anyway, thank you very much to John and Stephen. Coming up in just a moment.
To business. Today, I say loud and clear, Labour may have given up on you, but this Conservative Party never ever will. We will always be there for business.
The economy has dominated the agenda at the Conservative Party conference today. Could sound economics prove to be the Tories' redemption?
Decisions made in Washington aren't just shaping America, they're shaping Britain too. From migration to global security, from crime to health. Whatever happens in the White House today
will be felt in your town or city tomorrow.
That's why The Late Show is live from Washington, D.C.
Cutting through the politics to show you what it all means for Britain.
The Late Show live every night at midnight.
Only on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Liz Mitchell, MBE, gracing us with her presence on the soap this morning. Liz, so good to have you with us.
I am happy to be here.
You have the most incredible voice, the voice of a generation. The whole disco era is down to you. What do you think has made your songs so timeless? I mean, everybody knows them, don't they?
Everybody knows them.
Everybody.
One thing I'm very grateful for is the temper of our music, because it seems to be very friendly, warming, and even our slow songs. I was playing one just the other day for my 2-year-old grandson, and he said, more. I was so happy.
I'm with him on that. There's a real sense with your music, though, that it is uplifting.
Yes.
And you feel happy listening to it. I mean, despite whatever it is you're singing about, almost, it's just there's a joy to it.
Yes, and that is really a gift, I think, that most artists would want to have, is that when they make their music that is lasting and that is bringing happiness to people. Because for me, that's the whole point of singing. You know, you should be able to make the people you're entertaining feel happy, hear something good, forget the pain for a moment and just want to dance and just feel good.
And Boney M music is all over TikTok, isn't it? It's being remixed all the time. How do you feel watching your music being reinvented like that?
It is really wonderful. This has been going on since the 90s, well, even before the 90s, people were remixing our songs. So it's the uniqueness of the vocals, because that's what is given to them, just the plain vocals, and then they put new music on it, and it still sounds like Boney M.
The People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Conservative Party conference today focused on the economy, taxes, welfare, spending cuts, business and growth. Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride made the case for backing businesses.
We need to get business rates down. In fact, we need to go further. Much, much further. So today, I can announce that as a direct result of getting public spending under control, a future Conservative government will completely abolish business rates for shops and pubs on our high streets. End of!
And the Shadow Business Secretary, Andrew Griffith, pledged to tear up Labour's Socialist Employment Rights Bill.
Next Conservative government will actively reverse the job-destroying measures in Labour's Unemployment Rights Bill, a bill which will destroy job opportunities for young people while topping up Labour's political fund without workers ever being given the choice.
The Tories have traditionally enjoyed the reputation of being the party of sound money and competent economic management. So could economic reform prove to be the Conservative Party's redemption? Well, I'm joined now from the conference itself by the Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland, Andrew Bowie. Andrew, welcome. Thank you for joining me. We left, didn't we, this mysterious 20 billion black hole. So isn't it a bit late to get our reputation for financial propriety back, or can we do it?
Well, Jacob, I think you know as well as I, as do your viewers, that mythical 20 billion black hole never existed in the first place. But we do have a job to do to recover our reputation as being the party of economic competence. I think that has started this week with credible, thought-through and costed plans being set out by Mel Stride on the conference floor today. And I think if we're able to present to the British public that we do have a plan to grow our economy and to make this country a country where businesses can thrive, can grow, and the investment can flow, delivering the revenue and the jobs that we need, then we can win back the trust of the British people. It's an eminently Conservative thing to do, to want to secure our economy and provide growth for future generations. And I think that's where we're positioning the party back to, which is where we need to be.
Absolutely, I agree with all of that. But to what extent do we have to cut expenditure? We've started talking about cutting welfare, and we've referred to some relatively easy targets. But don't we have to go further than that? That, frankly, our welfare bill and our health bill are both becoming unaffordable?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's quite clear that despite our record in government as being a party that increased health spending to record levels in real terms, we were pouring money into a black hole. We need to address the fundamental problems that exist in the health service, in the welfare state, and indeed elsewhere, so that we can fix our economy and make it fit for the future. And we'll be hearing a lot more about what we want to do on the health service, and indeed what we want to do with the welfare state over the next few months and indeed years as we proceed towards the next election. The fact is that business as usual is not cutting it. We need to return this party to fundamental Conservative principles. As Margaret Thatcher so famously said, the facts of life are Conservatives, and those facts are being brought back to life this week in Manchester. So I think this is the beginning of a long journey. It's not going to happen overnight. It won't be tomorrow we suddenly see a return of the Conservative Party's fortunes in the polls, but I do think that returning us to being the party of economic competence, fiscal rectitude and responsibility is where the British public need us to be.
And this is quite a brave thing to be doing, because we're going to need to say to people that there will be cuts, that you put it quite clearly, it's not business as usual. How far can we go in that without losing voter support? I know Tom Tugendhat said we might have to think again about the triple lock.
Well, look, I mean, the triple lock is safe. We are protecting the triple lock. That's an absolute commitment from the Conservative Party to the people and indeed pensioners of this country. But we need to be brave. Jacob, let's face it, it's go big or go home time, right? We need to absolutely radically change our position, our policies, and indeed what we are offering to the British people, because this country is stuck in a rut. Everybody can see the decline in this country's fortunes and the decline of Britain, indeed, on the world stage amongst our competitors. So it's time to turn this ship around. And only the Conservatives are doing the hard work of deep thought and policy work that will enable us to go into that next election, when it comes in a few years' time, with a fully costed radical manifesto to change the future of this country. I think that's really exciting. Yes, it's brave. Yes, we're taking risk, but the country needs that, because frankly, we cannot continue as we are.
And in your own portfolios, Shadow Scottish Secretary, you must be really pleased that we're now going to have an intelligent energy policy and actually use the resources that we've got, which could be a really important boost to not just the UK economy, but especially to Scotland's economy.
Absolutely. It's about time, Jacob, frankly, that we had a sensible energy policy, and I do think that we are there now. Frankly, the unhinged energy policies of Ed Miliband, especially when it comes to our North Sea oil and gas, is completely at odds with the views of the British public. The British people understand that we need to be energy secure, that we need an abundance of energy if we are going to reduce energy bills in this country and reduce our reliance on imports. And the very fact that because of Ed Miliband's decisions, policies driven in Whitehall, completely removed from the reality on the ground or on the rigs in the North Sea, means that we are importing more of the gas that we use from Norway, who are drilling it from the very same sea that we're banning British companies employing British workers, generating revenue to the British Exchequer from exploiting, is absolutely nuts. We are going to maximise, get every last drop of oil and gas out of the North Sea. That's good for jobs, it's good for revenue, and it's good for our energy security. And ultimately, it will bring down bills. So that's an eminently sensible energy policy as far as I'm concerned.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining me. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Well, let me now go to my most intellectual panel, Sir John Redwood and Stephen Pound. Stephen, actually, what the Conservatives are arguing is classic Tory policy making. And historically, it's been very successful. This is the right way to be going about it.
No, it's a complete reversal of classic Tory policymaking. One thing I admire about the Conservative Party is that virtually all the workers' legislation regulations we've ever seen in this country since the Factory Acts came about through Conservative policies, going back from Lord Shaftesbury.
Lord Shaftesbury,
I have huge admiration for you. The idea that you can somehow take away the basic right for a person to have some employment security, which works in Sweden, Finland, most of the rest of Europe, and that's somehow a good thing, but actually to reduce workers' rights is terrible. But can I just say, importantly, the point was made there that somehow as if Labour is actually getting money from the unions, that the unions are infuriated by us.
Well, they still fund you.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
Millions of pounds a year, not you personally.
And the biggest one is actually talking about disaffiliating from us. But look, I'm sorry, the idea somehow that you can actually make this economy booming and boosting by reducing workers' rights is rubbish. But as for Ed Miliband, with one thing I would like to know whether Andrew Barry actually agrees with me that we should have fracking, because that is an example where it is local action that has actually stopped it happening, not Whitehall. But above all, do we want to be in thrall to the Russians and to the gas oligarchs for the rest of history, or do we want to be self-sufficient? The only way to be self-sufficient is to do what Ed Miliband is doing, which is drill on the existing platforms in the North Sea and become self-sufficient in wind, tidal power and wave power. I think it's a patriotic British thing to do, is to have British energy for British people.
Well, John, let me bring in two thoughts listening to those speeches of both Mel Stride and Anna Griffiths, saying things that we both agree with, but feeling slightly depressed that if we'd said them 2 years ago, we could have done them, and now we can't, and why weren't we saying them 2 years ago? And the other is that Andrew Bowie, quite rightly, its official party policy, was saying that the triple lock is safe forever. Is that the right guarantee to be giving when we all know government expenditure is too high and is unsustainably high?
Well, on the first point, there's going to be a year or more of people constantly saying, well, you're now coming up with some better policies, but why didn't you do it when you were in office? That's something they've just got to live through. And some of them were the guilty people because some of them were the ministers who didn't change the policy in the way that some of us are recommending. But I think it's still the right thing to do. And I think Kemi got off to a very good start by apologising for the mess over migration and saying that was just a set of mistakes and we need a completely new policy. And there are other areas where they've got to do that. As it happens, in the energy area, Claire Coutinho, when she became Secretary of State, was beginning to shift the policy in the right direction, and then Mr Miliband arrived and had an extreme reversal of everything that made any common sense. On the pensioners, I actually agree with the official opposition here. I think it would be foolish of them to now say they want to scrap the triple lock, having held to it throughout in government when it was a spending pressure that was always a problem. I would recommend to them that they instead propose a phased increase in the state retirement age, and every year that you add saves 7% of the total pension cost. And to sugar the pill, you could say that it's going to start from 10 years' time. You could say that if you don't want to have another year in work, you make a bigger contribution and you can then buy the extra year.
Yeah, but this is good news, Stephen, because it means you're never going to retire. We'll keep you on forever.
Yeah.
But isn't Labour going to have to cut expenditure? Isn't that the real truth coming out of here? The Tories are now talking about
Of course.
because Labour will have to do it.
No argument. No. But look, when I was listening to that, and the question was asked, how are you going to pay for this fee? Where are you going to get the 47 billion from? To actually, give the extra money to the brewers and the tide houses and every single shop, all the nail parlours and the Turkish barbers, all going to actually lose their ability, lose their demand to pay business rates. They said £47 million. Cutting waste. I'm sorry, it's just not good enough. They keep talking about cutting waste. In reality, there's a couple of things. Firstly, the NHS, as we all know, it was my birthday, came in July 1948, and within 4 years, you had the Gillibo report, which said it is unsustainable if women work and men don't die when they're 75. It's been financially inexplicable. It simply cannot. It's unsustainable, and it has been since 1952. And as for the triple lock, I agree with you. I think we have to actually move the pension age forward because people are working and living longer. And I find it almost embarrassing to think, as a pensioner, I'm actually doing very, very well. I appreciate that my generation is a fortunate generation, the post-war generation. We've never been involved in a major war, and we're doing quite all right. I think.
Well, the 47 billion was not about cutting waste. Yes. The 47 billion was 3 big policies, including a big slim down in the civil service.
Thank you very much, my most intellectual panel. So, the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor is facing questions after a major Chinese spying trial collapsed. And what message does it send to our adversaries? Is China Britain's most dangerous enemy? Plus, is the government's new plan to crack down on repeat protests a public safety measure or an attack on freedom of association?
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
It's a bit of a mixed picture across the Mediterranean over the next couple of days. Plenty of showers around for the Canaries as we head through Tuesday afternoon. Perhaps some fairly brisk winds too. But for much of Spain, Portugal, southern parts of France and Italy, there'll be plenty of sunny spells on offer. However, for the Balkans, a lot of wet weather around, perhaps even some snow over the mountains. So definitely feeling a little bit cooler here with some brisk winds too. There is going to be more sunshine on offer as we head through the rest of the week, and temperatures quite widely into the 20s for most of us.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Over the coming days, high pressure is set to dominate our weather, which means many areas will see dry and settled conditions, though we can't rule out some light rain at times. And we'll see that light rain start to push into the far northwest this evening as frontal systems edging closer. A fair few isobars on the chart here too, so quite blustery at times, but otherwise high pressure sitting to the south, which means staying mostly dry, though we'll see some thicker clouds start to edge into Wales, southwest England. This could produce some odd spells of drizzle, particularly around hilly areas. But the main source of the rain will be pushing into parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland. It's quite a wet start here and quite cloudy for many areas, so remaining mostly mild. Most towns and cities dropping between 11 to 13 degrees Celsius.
So once again, it is set to be another wet start across Scotland. It still could be fairly blustery around western coast, though those winds will ease away through the course of the day, perhaps seeing some brighter spells to the very far east of Scotland. Across Northern Ireland, once again, plenty of low clouds, some light outbreaks of rain. This will also start to push into northwestern parts of England. Wales and southwest England, once again, mostly dry, though plenty of low cloud, which could lead to a gloomy start and some patchy drizzle around hilly areas. Elsewhere, we could see some low cloud, mist and fog, but it should clear away fairly quickly through the morning and remaining mostly dry across much of England and Wales, perhaps more cloud around compared to this afternoon. Outbreaks of rain starting to edge into northern parts of England and Wales, but generally clearing across Scotland and Northern Ireland, so turning brighter here, just a few showers across the far north of Scotland. And it's still going to be warm in the sunshine, not quite as warm as this afternoon though, highs reaching around 17 to 18 degrees Celsius. Now, some remnants of cloud and rain could start to skirt its way into southern parts through the early hours of Wednesday, eventually clearing through the afternoon. But for most, it should be another dry day, sunny spells, more cloud across Scotland once again with some blustery showers. But high pressure remains dominating for the rest of the week, so it should be mostly dry, a little cloudy at times, and temperatures around about average for the time of year.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Dubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Sir Keir Starmer's National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, is facing scrutiny following the collapse of the trial of two men accused of spying for Peking in Parliament. Dare I say, peeking into our private affairs. The government and others are concerned that the failure of the trial sends a signal to China of British vulnerability, but others say there was simply not enough evidence. Is China Britain's most dangerous enemy? Well, I'm joined now by the Executive Director of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, Luke de Pulford. Luke, thank you for coming back in.
Pleasure.
First of all, do you think this trial could have gone ahead if the government had been more robust about it?
Certainly, yes. The allegations here, I think it's worth taking a step back. The allegations here were extremely serious. The CPS had alleged that 34 reports had been compiled and had found their way into the Politburo. And back when charges were laid, under the Official Secrets Act 1911, which is a very difficult piece of legislation to get an espionage conviction, the CPS was assured by the then government that this difficulty in the legislation could be overcome. And the difficulty is that you need to have passed information to an enemy. That was the query, and that is why the case has fallen apart now, not for lack of other evidence against the alleged defendants.
So it's not saying that they didn't do it or that they didn't really pass it over. It's saying that China is not defined by an enemy as an enemy. What is the legal process for defining an enemy, as far as you know it?
Well, normally, according to the most recent case law on this, which was a case involving a Bulgarian, a deputy national security advisor had to be deputed by the government to argue that whichever country would meet the threshold for an enemy for the purposes of that legislation and the common law. Back in April 2024, the CPS had assurances that the government was willing to do that. Very recently, in fact, as recently as the reshuffle, that all changed, and that's what the controversy in the past few days was about.
So what the government has been saying is that, A, they haven't interfered, it's nothing to do with them, nothing to do with their friendship towards China, but that the last Conservative government said that China was clearly not an enemy, used phraseology, James Cleverly used phraseology about how it was an important partner, that sort of terminology. Does that make a difference?
I think there is some truth to this. I mean, as you know, I've been on your show during the last government and a very vocal critic of the policy towards China in that period. And it is true that ministers in that period explicitly rejected threat language. They wanted to talk about challenging or these word soup things, epoch-defining systemic challenges or whatever. So this has been a problem, and it could have been very embarrassing for a Deputy National Security Advisor to be cross-examined in court, having said China's an enemy. You imagine the Defence Council could have made absolute mincemeat of them. So, yes, I think it was an issue here. But this doesn't really work, pointing the finger at the last government, because even though I think there was strategic incoherence on China, they were certainly willing to back up the CPS and say, we think we can get to that enemy threshold, go ahead with the prosecution.
And in terms of the diplomacy, is it in our interests to say that China is an enemy, or should we be saying sort of woollier phraseology to have a better relationship with a country that is going to be a major power over the rest of this century?
Well, you're going to have to permit me a little bit of a pun here, not one to compete with yours in your opening gambit. The government's strategy on China is supposed to be that they'll challenge and cooperate and compete. But it's emerged that I think that we're dealing with caving in, covering up and cashing out. And that's much more an accurate description of exactly what's going on here. I believe that while the economic and financial dialogue with China is being discussed, it was thought not advantageous to proceed with this trial, which would mean the government potentially looking pretty silly, having to defend that they thought China was an enemy when clearly their public statements contradict that, and potentially being torn to pieces by Defence Counsel, who would point out that this wasn't a coherent position.
And you were saying that the policy seemed to change at the reshuffle. So was David Lammy tougher on China than Yvette Cooper, or is this really decided in Number 10, and Number 10 has done one of its famous U-turns?
So this comes out, I think, in the complexity of the very detailed reporting over the weekend. It seems that rather than ministers having been involved, that a special advisor, Jonathan Powell, and a small group of senior civil servants decided that they would move the goalposts here, that they would not request certain parts of evidence that could have got the government to that threshold and therefore enabled the CPS to prosecute. So that's the issue here. Who made these decisions, when, and on whose authority? Because if it was Powell, I mean, he acts under the Prime Minister's authority. So I do think there are questions to answer.
And he is not allowed to give orders to civil servants under the 2010 Constitutional Act. I thought your pun was going to be we must not pander to China, but that may be a giant joke. Anyway, thank you very much to Luke. The government has announced new police powers to crack down on repeated protests, arguing frequent pro-Palestinian demonstrations have left Jewish communities feeling unsafe, particularly following last week's appalling terror attacks in Manchester. However, many are concerned that the move will extend further long-term and infringe on peaceful demonstrations. Is this a fair move to protect public safety or an affront to the right to protest as a means to conceal two-tier policing? Let me bring my panel on that. And that's John Redwood and Stephen Pound. John, what worries me is that the government and the Metropolitan Police have been utterly feeble in using the powers that they've got to arrest people who've made anti-Semitic comments, who have behaved appallingly in public, and therefore giving them more power doesn't seem to be the right answer if you're not using the powers you've got.
No, I'm very worried as well, because I think people are very worried that there are different standards in the approach to some types of protests and other types of protests. And they feel that some protests happen too often and have associated violence or associated anti-Semitic slogans or whatever, which are not properly policed. And then there's a big fuss and probably over-policing of perfectly peaceful rallies about something else. And I think in that atmosphere of suspicion between the different types of protesters we've got, it's a very silly idea to say you're going to strengthen the law. As you rightly say, they should use the powers they've got.
And cumulative impact becomes quite a nebulous phrase, doesn't it? Gives a lot of discretion. And it may just be that there's been a march the previous week on a completely different subject, and therefore you can't have your march. This is very...
I suspect that you may be aware that we're just approaching the 100th anniversary of the birth of Margaret Thatcher. Now, Margaret Thatcher, at the height of the poll tax riots, never, ever suggested banning demonstrations. And when we had the fox hunting, and I remember all too vividly that that wasn't banned. And I think the difference here is, A, it's what's being said, when you have a Labour councillor talking about cutting people's throats and then getting freed by a jury, and when you have people talking about from the river to the sea, globalise the intifada. So what I can't understand here is, A, why the Mayor of London and the Metropolitan Police aren't using the existing powers, but they have to licence demonstrations. They have to be like, if you simply just turn up with 150,000 people without getting a Metropolitan Police approval, then you're breaking the law. You can deal with it. But the second thing is, Jacob, some of this language is incendiary in every sense of the word. It breaches all there's any number of laws, you know, inciting racial violence, inciting hatred. Why don't we use that? But I think one of the difficulties is the easiest thing to do is to say we just ban something. I'm saying that's the easy thing. And I think politicians too often, naturally, excuse you two from that, take the easy option. In this case, I don't think it's the right one.
Well, and the legislation is an apology for not doing anything. So you say, well, ban it, we'll introduce a new law, rather than doing something about it. And don't they again seem to be going for soft targets? So people who wear a T-shirt saying Palestine Action or whatever it is, they get arrested. But people shouting the most vile things, so they're arresting 8-year-olds, female clerics, and they're leaving nasty people who are shouting very vile, violence-inducing things to carry on. It just doesn't seem they've got the right balance.
But nor should you assume that this law will only apply to the Gaza protests, which you've got in your mind. A lot of other people are very worried they're going to apply to perfectly peaceful protests.
Farmers.
Where they're daring to support our flag, and apparently it's now wrong to support our own flag.
Yeah, indeed, according to some retired association footballer whose views get a lot of publicity. But that's right, John's got a very good point. It then applies to everything. And that can undermine freedom of association, which is a fundamental democratic right.
I think I can remember when I was quite young, my father taking me to Trafalgar Square to hear Aneurin Bevan speaking against the Suez War. And I was actually said, you know, how can he say these things? Because he was speaking against the government. And my dad took me to Speaker's Corner the next week, where you had Donald Soper and various other people. And I was actually proud of this country, that we have the right and this ability and the freedom to actually enunciate these views, you know, without being shut down, without having tear gas, without having water cannon, and without falling into some sort of dystopic fascist state. However, the Palestinian one is a slightly different matter. Week after week after week. And it causes huge pain, huge distress to people, not just to the Jewish community, but in the wider community. So I don't think banning is the answer. Licensing, approving, and above all, enforcing the existing law.
And I have one final thought, that no one should have marched this weekend after what happened on Thursday.
There should have been respect.
It should have been respect. Ordinary decency meant everyone should have stayed at home.
Yeah, obviously, and they're putting people off their own cause by their behaviour. And I think the police at some point have got to say there are limits to how many police we can afford to field so regularly.
It's not as if there's no crime, is it?
Well, thank you very much to Luke and indeed to my panel. In a moment, cyclists in London are setting records, but not necessarily the records that you want. They're setting records for breaking the rules and running red lights and doing much worse than motorists who are such splendid fellows. We'll be discussing that shortly.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/yoursay. There you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/yoursay, because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes and Co weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight-talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Decisions made in Washington aren't just shaping America, they're shaping Britain too. From migration to global security, from crime to health, Whatever happens in the White House today
will be felt in your town or city tomorrow.
That's why The Late Show is live from Washington, D.C.
Cutting through the politics to show you what it all means for Britain.
The Late Show live every night at midnight.
Only on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
You want to know what's really going on in the corridors of power? Labour don't know what to do with you half the time, and that makes you quite lethal in the chamber. Get behind the headlines with Chopper's Political Podcast. Join me, Christopher Hope, as I sit down with the great and the good of British politics. We'll see where this ruling takes us. These are the stories shaping our nation. Chopper's Political Podcast, available now on all platforms. Listen in and stay ahead.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
London cyclists are setting records for knocking over pedestrians. Police say 603 people were injured in bike collisions last year, up from 507 the year before. Also, half of cyclists admit to running red lights. 2 pedestrians were killed in 2024, while fines for cyclists in the City of London outnumbered drivers more than 10 to 1. Is it time cyclists were held accountable for their conduct on the road? Well, I'm joined now by vigilante cyclist Dave Sherry. Mr. Sherry, thank you very much for joining me. I know you film drivers who are breaking the law, but do you think that cyclists ought to obey the law as well?
Well, yeah, considering they're vulnerable road users.
I mean, I was walking along Birdcage Walk today, and a cyclist ignored the red light, swung in front of a taxi who had the right of way, got quite close to being run over, and just carried on as if nothing had happened. But why are cyclists, when, as you rightly say, they're so vulnerable, so cavalier?
Well, the law's on their side now, so basically, if a vehicle hits a cyclist, they're at fault. If a cyclist hits a pedestrian, they're at fault. It's the old chestnut. The Road Traffic Act hasn't changed over the years to accommodate cyclists or any other road users, so basically, it's a free-for-all.
And the cyclists seem to be the ones who break the law the most. I mean, we've got pictures on of them just cycling over a zebra crossing, weaving around pedestrians. Are you tempted to do a bit of your vigilante filming of cyclists?
Well, at the end of the day, it's been going on for years, and until they get registrations and insurance, you're banging your head against a brick wall.
And would you be in favour of that, of making people have registration numbers on bicycles?
Well, if it makes the road a safer, better place for all road users, then maybe so. But at the moment, it is very marginalised with regard to injuries and deaths. So at the moment, it's just about looking after oneself and looking after other road users and trying to avoid road traffic accidents.
No, indeed. And cyclists have their own cycle lanes, they've got their own special sets of lights and all sorts of things. But there's not a lot of point in putting those in if they don't then use them.
It's not actually a legal requirement to use them. And also my experience when using them is the councils don't really clean them and you're left with broken glass. So you're probably safer on the road than you are on a segregated cycle track.
But isn't it not always about the law? Because the highway code is guidance rather than law. It's about road users being sensible and that actually cyclists, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them are extremely arrogant in the approach that they take and dangerous in terms of their own safety, let alone that of pedestrians.
Well, yeah, no one's perfect. You can't tie everyone with the same brush. My philosophy in life is you've got to look after yourself. You've got to be out there. You've got to take responsibility for one's actions and other road users. You can't be going around hitting pedestrians. I think the main concern at the moment are the phone snatchers, the people going around on illegally modified e-bikes. Now, they can really do some damage. Instead of a normal cyclist 10 to 15 miles an hour, imagine getting hit by one of them bad boys doing about 30.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, speed limits don't apply to cyclists. Do you think the speed limits should apply to cyclists as well?
Well, not really, because unless you're in an Olympic event, you're not going to achieve much speed.
Well, that's true, though. Sometimes going downhill, you can get up a bit of speed. If you go down Rush Hill on the A37 in Somerset, you get up a bit of speed. Anyway, that's all from me. I got a brief mention of Somerset in. Up next, it's the one and only Patrick Christys. Patrick, what are you going to be talking about this evening?
Well, loads on. Gary Neville seems to think that angry, middle-aged white people are the problem, not, of course, radical Islamist terrorists. So, going to be getting stuck into that. Talking of extremism, we saw plenty of it on the streets over the weekend, so we'll be discussing that. We've also allowed a Portuguese man who was scheduled for deportation to stay in the country. Shock horror. He's gone on to murder somewhat, so we'll be talking about a load of those topics and much more. Stay tuned.
Today's outlook: cool, calm and completely horizontal. Boxed Aircon sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Over the coming days, high pressure is set to dominate our weather, which means many areas will see dry and settled conditions, though we can't rule out some light rain at times. And we'll see that light rain start to push into the far northwest this evening as frontal systems edge in closer. A fair few isobars on the chart here too, so quite blustery at times, but otherwise high pressure sitting to the south, which means staying mostly dry, though we'll see some thicker clouds start to edge into Wales, southwest England. This could produce some odd spells of drizzle, particularly around hilly areas. But the main source of the rain will be pushing into parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, so quite a wet start here and quite cloudy for many areas, so remaining mostly mild. Most towns and cities dropping between 11 to 13 degrees Celsius. So once again, it is set to be another wet start across Scotland. It still could be fairly blustery around western coast, though those winds will ease away through the course of the day, perhaps seeing some brighter spells to the very far east of Scotland. Across Northern Ireland, once again, plenty of low clouds, some light outbreaks of rain. This will also start to push into northwestern parts of England. Wales and southwest England, once again, mostly dry, though plenty of low cloud, which could lead to a gloomy start and some patchy drizzle around hilly areas. Elsewhere, we could see some low cloud, mist and fog, but it should clear away fairly quickly through the morning and remaining mostly dry across much of England and Wales, perhaps more cloud around compared to this afternoon. Outbreaks of rain starting to edge into northern parts of England and Wales, but generally clearing across Scotland and Northern Ireland, so turning brighter here. Just a few showers across the far north of Scotland, and it's still going to be warm in the sunshine, not quite as warm as this afternoon though, highs reaching around 17 to 18 degrees Celsius. Now, some remnants of cloud and rain could start to skirt its way into southern parts through the early hours of Wednesday, eventually clearing through the afternoon. But for most, it should be another dry day, sunny spells, more cloud across Scotland once again with some blustery showers. But high pressure remains dominating for the rest of the week, so it should be mostly dry, a little cloudy at times, and temperatures around about average for the time of year.
Today's outlook: cool, calm and completely horizontal. Boxed Aircon sponsors the weather on GB News.
You could bank an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. And if that wasn't enough, you'll also get to drive away in this brand new motorhome. This brand new 2025 Benamar Primero could be yours. It comes with all the mod cons you'd expect from a vehicle worth over £74,000 and comfortably sleeps 4 people. This prize package is worth over £104,000. For another chance to win, text WIN to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB16 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 31st of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
So he can say whatever he wants.
A straight-talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk then?
No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
The fact is Trump made a good start. No.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints.
How many fingers have I got up?
About 10. So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every